So John, today I want to talk about something that I was just having a bit of a triggered flashback the other day to a time when I had got involved with a small startup where the COO was recommended to have a word with me and to try and get my advice because he was a bit stuck. The founder, the CEO and founder, was one of those people who was a young guy who believed that he knows everything, that he knew everything possible that there was about business, and he wouldn't listen to the people that he had hired as early founding team. I wouldn't call them co-founders. They didn't get the same shares or anything like that, but he had hired a small co-founding team, had about 15 people around him. But this young CEO, inexperienced CEO, who just happened to have been able to have a good idea and convince friends and family to give him money for his idea. And it was a good idea, I think. He was relentlessly berating his team around him, telling them how to do their jobs. And as though he knew operations, IT, marketing, finance, sales, everything. He believed he was the fountain of knowledge in the organization, and they all had to listen to him. And the CEO had come to me and said, sorry, the COO, and he just said, I don't know what to do. I really like the guy, really believe in the idea, but he won't take any advice. Could you please have a word with him? So I was doing this as a favor to a friend. I didn't have any skin in the game. I wasn't being paid as a consultant. I just went, okay, I'll go and have a word. And I spent about 45 minutes with the guy. I scheduled more time in my diary, but he was such an arrogant little that I had to just get up and walk out and go, well, obviously you know best. And I walked away in total frustration because this guy would not accept advice from anybody who had been there before, done that before. And he was convinced that he was right and that his way was the only way. Have you ever come across founders like this before? And how did it end? How do you know how to deal with them? What kind
I
of
think
advice
I
would
mean, it's a sobering story, isn't it? Because the reality is that all of us are a work in progress, and the very best founders I've worked with are people who recognise their blind spots, recognise the gaps in their knowledge, and have a thirst for seeking out the best people, the expertise, and for continually learning. Now, when that isn't the case, by definition, you almost get a business that's going to be very constrained because it's not absorbing any improvements. It's not looking at the best ways of doing things. It's not figuring out a path which will lead it to excellence, to growth, to success. And the reality is, as any business grows, it will encounter a whole series of growth problems from how people are brought on board as either employees, associates, contractors, or whatever, how suppliers are brought on board, how services delivered to a growing mix and variety of clients, particularly if there's, for example, tiered services or a whole range of products, and on it goes. And more importantly, I suppose, because this is the lifeblood of any business, how the finances are effectively managed as that business is growing. And any misstep there will cause, worst case, the business to seize and collapse if it runs out of money. Now, someone who is not willing to either listen to feedback or to take things on board may get some distance before things go terribly wrong. But unfortunately, I would be pretty confident that they will go wrong at some point, because the most successful leads I've come across recognize that their role is to get out of the way of their teams, to recruit the very best people with the best experience, the most innovative minds, and people who can collaborate and work well with each other. But also, very importantly, I think, recognizing that as a business grows, you need different skills. So people that often need to move in or out of roles. So someone who's very good at running a 3-person or 5-person team may not be the right person to run a 20 or 30 or 50-person team, as an example. And
or may not even be the right person to run a one-man show. Just
indeed,
because you have a good idea doesn't mean to say you're the right person to execute on it. In this particular person's case, he was a very good ambassador, frontman, face. He could talk the talk. He could get the investment in, but he didn't have a Scooby-Doo about business. And I kept on saying, you don't buy a dog and bark yourself. He had hired all these really smart people, but kept on telling them, this is what I want you to do, and this is what I want you to do, and didn't let them, as you said, he was completely blind to his own gaps.
Exactly. Now, I think the danger there is that a business can grow some distance before, if you like, fatal problems start happening, whether it's fatal around the growth of the business or the delivery or even the compliance, depending on the industry. But at some point, these things will catch up. And I think the danger is a character like the sort of person you just described is likely then to blame everyone apart from themselves, because this will be a fundamental blind spot in their lives. Now, the challenge is often to get a business started, to have the confidence to ask for money, to go out there and almost pitch a business before everything's fully formed, takes some degree of nerve and confidence anyway. And that's an important ingredient of a founder to get things started. Otherwise, things would never get off the ground. But by continuing down that path and thinking they know everything, they're better than everybody else, it will inevitably lead to some misstep along the way. And it's almost like a lottery shoot of where that business will go wrong. It may be from, I said, like a product growth perspective, that it can cope well with small numbers of customers, but not with dozens or hundreds or thousands. Or maybe as the business grows, that decisions are being made that have some, sort of legal or ethical or compliance type problem, which doesn't really get surfaced until things have got to a certain size, or the finances are running in such a way that it is heading towards complete failure at some point. It may keep ahead of the expenses for a period, but if things suddenly go wrong, or even in the short term, there's no contingency in the business. So if I came across someone like that as an investor, I would be very, very reluctant to invest or to then try and work alongside. And I think in the same way that you found that degree of frustration, even in a short conversation of half hour, 40 minutes, whatever it was, that will be replicated many times over by the team they're working with. And over probably a shortish period of time, all those people will step away and be careful, because they don't want to damage their own reputation.
Yeah.
And so it may be not necessarily shared so starkly with the founder. And even then, I think they would just see the other person as at fault.
Well, in this case, I was so concerned for the staff that were
yes, of course, yes,
that I found out who. So this founder had, even although they were early stage, had a non-executive committee. So you had 3 non-executive directors, all investors, right? When they invested, he said, and I want you to be part of my non-executive director committee to provide guidance to the organization. And I went to the chair of the board, the chairman of the non-executive directors, and I said to him, look, would you meet me for a coffee? I've just spent 45 minutes with your CEO, and I have concerns. I just want to share with you. I believe I've got a duty of care to the staff because the COO had called me in. And I sat down with this guy, and he was so blinded by the charisma of the founder that he kept on repeating over and over, no, but he says it's all okay. You must understand he's a young man with a strong vision. And I went, you must understand he's a young man without any experience. And I don't see that the non-exec team is giving the guidance necessary and the mentorship. And he went, oh, well, we're here to make sure that there's correct governance. And I went, your role goes a lot further than that, and you've put a chunk of money in this. Sadly, this particular startup story has a very bad ending. The young man managed to go through 2 separate funding rounds. Both funding rounds were friends and family. And when I say friends and family, I mean his close family cashed in their pension pots to put into this company. And he blew it all before earning a single penny in revenue. And the whole thing just collapsed like a house of cards and had to be wound up. And it really was a good idea. And with the right person at the helm, it could have actually gone somewhere. But it was astonishing to me to see that just the sheer arrogance, I think, of somebody who believes, I've been in business for, I'd hate to count the number of years, and I know I don't know everything. And I knew that from and as a matter of fact, you don't need to know everything. That's why you've got people around you, you ask for help, which brings me on to another story of a different founder who had a completely different problem. And I spoke to him, I actually interviewed him for one of my own podcasts a couple of years after he had left the company that he founded. And he left it because he had a complete and utter mental breakdown. And the company had been doing well, and I believe it continued to grow after he left as well. But he had a complete and utter mental breakdown because in his mind, he already knew that he didn't know everything. However, he believed that his team expected him to know everything. His team, his exec team, were constantly coming to him and unburdening their problems, and he believed they were expecting him to have the answers. And he thought that if he didn't have an answer or a solution, he was failing his team. And so that's same but different to the previous one. He knew he had gaps, but he thought he was supposed to have all the answers. So he felt a tremendous amount of pressure. So when his team would come and present him with a problem, he would spend ages going and finding out what the solution was, no matter whether it was a legal problem, whether it was a marketing problem, a sales problem, even technology problems. He went out of his way to go and find a solution. And I turned around to him and I said, but why didn't you just hire in help? Starting a business is not the same as being at school. This isn't an exam. Nobody's expecting you to walk into the boardroom with every single answer. Nobody's expecting you to stand in front of your team with all the answers. That's what your non-exec team and also your community of founders around you, other people that you can network with, will probably have faced the same thing. All you need to do is ask for help. Just say, I don't know. If the IT guy comes to you and says, we've got a problem, according to data protection, our data can't be here and we're on these servers, you know, delegate responsibility and go, you're right, that's a problem. What's the solution? Just push it back down to them, but give them the freedom and the autonomy to go and find out. Don't be like the previous guy and make stuff up or anything like this. But this guy felt so burdened with it that he just had a meltdown. And he said, I couldn't take it anymore. I was working 24/7. I had a family breakdown. His relationship broke down with his wife, with his kids, the whole lot. Everything because he thought he was supposed to know everything. And he was the one who said in the podcast, he said, look, my recommendation to all founders is be completely transparent with your staff, your board, with everybody. If you don't know the answer to a question, say, I don't know that. And then you carry on with, let's go and find out, or who's the best expert we can go and ask, spend some money, get in a lawyer, get in an accountant, get in another IT expert if you have to. But starting a business is not about you having all the answers to every single question that's ever going to be asked. None of us have those, for crying out loud. On a daily basis, I'm looking for help from a community or from the internet or whatever. We don't. This isn't something that any of us should be expected to do in business.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, as you were describing that, it sounds, I can feel the stress and concern of that founder. It must have been awful for them. It takes me all the way back to the early stage of my career, as I was entrusted by leading teams. First of all, quite small teams of 2 or 3 people. Then it started growing quite rapidly. And it coincided with someone giving me a book and said, you might want to have a read of this. It may give you some thoughts or ideas. And it was a book that has stuck in my mind all these years later, 40 plus years. And it was called The 1 Minute Manager. You may have read it yourself or come across it. But the concept of this book is that the manager started off in the story. It was kind of like sort of a leadership guide, but it's told in a bit of a story fashion, if you like, to lodge it in people's minds. The manager started off in a very, very similar way to your founder. And then he was given some guidance of saying that every time someone comes into your office and they give you a problem, imagine that's a monkey on their back, that they're literally just asking it to get off their back and they're passing on to you. And now the monkey's sitting on your back and you have to feed it. You have to clean up after it. You have to train it. You have to look after it. And he said, what you have to do is make sure that you get, first job number 1 is get all those monkeys off your back and onto the backs of the people whose job it is, because they've successfully passed their job over to you, and the second piece is, as people continue to try and give monkeys to you, that you only accept a monkey if it's truly one that you need to look after, nurture, feed, and take responsibility for. Otherwise, you need to pass that back. You can acknowledge it and say, you're quite right, we do have a problem here on the compliance or legal or technology or product side, whatever it may be. What I need you to do is to take ownership for it. The person in the team who's like the product director, let's say, I will be part of a group along with these other people I recommend, and we will come up with a solution, but you have to own coordinating that, booking the meetings, coming up with the ideas and all this kind of stuff. And then we'll work towards whatever solution is needed. And it's almost doing a mental checklist of saying how many jobs or activities are sitting on your shoulders at any point in time. And if you're the founder and every job is ultimately sitting on your shoulder, particularly if it's every problem, you're going to get so overburdened. You know, think of having 20 monkeys sitting on your back. You're literally going to be falling over and collapsing. So you need to get those off and back to the people who can actually do something about it. And there's nothing more pleasurable for someone than if they can land a monkey on someone else's shoulders, particularly if it's their boss, or they can pass it upwards. They will go back feeling relieved from that meeting that they may have been told to, you know, bring any problems to me, but there's an age-old expression saying, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions, or bring me the problem and your recommendations for a solution. You just have to set that kind of mindset in the business. I've recently founded a business which is growing at the moment. And one of the things I've set for myself is that I am not on the critical path for any key activity, any client delivery, any significant piece of work at any point in time. Of course, I'm involved on a daily basis with every aspect of the business, but I'm making sure that as we're doing things, we either have trusted partners who are delivering work for us, or people in the team know that's their job to, you know, deliver those particular elements. So it's a very important piece for any founder. It's about kind of recognizing where they sit in that hierarchy, and that they do need to keep on top of things, undoubtedly, and the buck will ultimately stop with them. There's no issue with any of those kind of mental philosophies or pieces. They do need to provide the leadership and guidance, but they cannot and must not take on every task or every problem. Otherwise, the business will slowly and surely grind to a halt, you know, for very different reasons than the first example. But it's about making sure that accountability lies with the right people in the organization, or bringing in experts who can do work and then saying, I will wait for that recommendation to come through, and then I'll look at the options and make a decision from there.
I do love that. Get the monkey off your back.
It's a very, very visual thing. And if the next time someone tries to put a monkey on your back, Andrew, just mentally think, am I happy to accept it sitting there 24/7? Am I happy to feed it, look after it? And if you're not, or if you think that this monkey still needs to be sitting on someone else's shoulders, then politely but firmly pass it back to them and say, I can see we've got this problem. I think you need to own this. I'm very happy to give my input, but you need to own solving it. We may need an expert in as well, so we need to fund bringing in a specialist expertise, or whatever the situation calls for.
And just before we wrap up, before we got on this chat, you were talking about a community in the area where you live, a community of small business owners, startups, and founders. And I think that one of my recommendations to particularly early founders that are first-time business owners, first time on their path, is look around in your local community, because there probably is a bunch of people just like you, or get into online communities. There are hundreds of them on Facebook, LinkedIn, and things like this, where you'll find like-minded people that are quite supportive and open with their advice, their knowledge, people that have gone through a similar thing to what, you know, face similar challenges, face similar questions that you've got, and things like that. People who do pretty much what we're doing right now, sharing what we know so that others can hopefully learn or be inspired by it. So the big thing for me is, it's not an exam. Ask for help. Don't be afraid to accept help. That's not a sign of weakness. And now I'll add to that, get the monkey off your back.
Perfect. Perfect way to conclude.
Thank you, John. We'll chat next time.